The thousands, maybe tens of thousands, now thronging Kabul airport, climbing up on baggage chutes and even clinging to the edges of planes, seeking safety somewhere, anywhere other than life under the Taliban, testifies to the fearful future that awaits the people of Afghanistan. The Taliban are telling media outlets like CNN they've changed for the better. And you can understand those now feeling guilty about leaving Afghanistan to its fate, wanting to believe that, maybe even really believing it. But there's simply no evidence. If anything, with a vast trove of abandoned American weaponry now theirs, and with clear covert help from Pakistan and no doubt encouragement from Moscow and Beijing, Taliban 2.0 are likely to be just as ruthless and vicious and somewhat stronger and more effective than before. Let's never forget why Australian and other military forces were there in the first place. We were there because that's where the September 11 terrorist atrocity was masterminded from. And that's where the terrorist training camps were. We weren't there because we were trying to turn a medieval society into a modern pluralist democracy overnight, although that did come later. We were there to protect ourselves from obscene acts of terror that were brought from that land to our own. Later, of course, with the use of the internet, fostered in many young people born and raised in the West. And remember that the Taliban and those they harboured weren't just terrorist groups. They had formed a terrorist state, a country dedicated to the export everywhere of an utterly barbaric perversion of religion. That's what's now back, and back with a vengeance. As many of the jihadists on the streets of Kabul see it, the West is weak. The West is on its way out. And the West's own lack of confidence in its institutions is, no doubt, hastening its decline. Here's the former Guantanamo Bay prisoner, now restored Taliban commander, front and centre inside the presidential palace, speaking in triumph. He's been identified as Ghulam Rouhani, one of the first terrorists jailed in Guantanamo Bay, but released after 8 years because he told a US Administrative Appeals Board that he was nothing more than a shopkeeper who had helped the Americans, that he wanted to go back home to care for his sick father. And so fearful of offending his human rights, he was released. And now, see where he is today. As always, when Islamist fanatics look to be winning, you can expect an upsurge in terrorism. And every dictatorship, whether it's Tehran or Moscow or Beijing, will be emboldened by the utter humiliation of the US, democracy's great champion. For us, in Australia especially, it's noteworthy that the mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party, the Global Times, was today telling the people of Taiwan to get out their Chinese red flags, that resistance would be futile and that America would abandon them. And frankly, listening to President Biden today, you really would not want to be relying on America. For a man that struggles at the best of times, it was an embarrassing display to watch him try and explain and then justify this catastrophe. But tweets from the US Navy SEAL who killed Osama bin Laden said it all. He demanded the general in charge of the chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff to resign. He declared that Biden's withdrawal was a debacle and that men who died there in Afghanistan would be ashamed of their president. This is a massive wake-up call for Australia, or it should be. We need to understand that Islamist terrorism has never gone away, probably now taken a serious turn for the worst, and that countries like China and Russia will use this rogue state as part of its ongoing power play with the West. The country that currently has its military doing COVID vaccinations and health enforcement has got to get serious about armed forces that can fight and keep a serious enemy at bay. Andrew Hastie and others have said as much. But is our government listening? No. Woke diversity classes won't cut it when faced with a sort of enemy coming at us. Are we up for it, Australia? I hope we are, but I fear we're not as sure-footed as we once were here in Australia and the West more generally. It puts this virus into perspective, doesn't it? If our premiers can't even come together to agree on how we deal with this pandemic, God help us when other far more deadly challenges emerge. Because without a doubt, they will.